through books and through literature and so on.
Okay, one thing which obviously I don't think the session will be complete without mentioning, especially since we're sitting in Mehboob's studio. One thing that does go from the drawing room into the streets of Pakistan is Bollywood. The love for Bollywood, the passion for Bollywood. I've met more Pakistanis who knew the intricacies and the trivia about Hindi films than, perhaps people I've met here. So if any of you has any thoughts about what explains this passion for Bollywood, which is coming from a country, obviously they're supposed to deny the legitimacy of. So,
if I can just jump in quickly, I mean, it often strikes me that between Indians and Pakistanis, the Pakistanis are in some ways much better informed, and that's often through culture. In Pakistan, people watch Bollywood movies, they see Indian television, they have a sort of cultural exposure to India that Indians probably don't have of Pakistan for lots of obvious reasons. So it's not quite a two-way mirror. And like you say, and also in the sporting field, actually, you look at the whole business with Sania Mirza and the cricketer and all of these scandals. I mean, these are huge, huge stories in Pakistan that have, massive traction with ordinary people.
On the point of Bollywood, I can't tell you how important Lahore was to our pre-partition film industry. There was this notion that कि अगर film चलेगी तो पहले Lahore में चलेगी. Lahore was like a test for the entire nation, for the taste of the country. And as much as Bollywood has included other people, it is a powerfully Punjabi medium, and 70-60% of Pakistan is Punjab, so it's no surprise. But in one of the ways it's always surprised me, and it's kind of an amazing tribute in some ways to the closeness, to the fact that these bonds have survived, is that these countries, despite being in isolation, have evolved in very similar ways. Not including the state, but in cultural ways, you can still walk into a wedding in Lahore and feel a deep sense of familiarity, especially if you're coming from somewhere like Delhi, where there is a Punjabi influence. So the fact that these films should appeal is no surprise at all. This is their culture. I think that it's complicated. I think that when they accept this appeal into their hearts, there's also a feeling of like, why do we love this so much? and that's not uncomplicated, that feeling.
Mr. Parthasarathi, did you have moments when you walked into weddings in Lahore and you thought, hey, this is so familiar?
Walking into weddings as the Indian Consul General, one found a lot of people looking for you primarily because they wanted visas to meet their relatives here. So I never flattered myself that I was the center of attraction because I was me. But I want to say one thing, about Bollywood. It's funny. The schizophrenia. I remember going out with my wife once, and then there was this large party of all these Pakistani ladies there, and it was the fashionable thing to say that nahin, hum ye nahi dekhte, it's not kosher. But then the lady who was saying this to me, I heard her talking to someone else about the latest Bollywood television production which she had been seeing the early day. So there is this schizophrenia. You enjoy it, but yet you don't want to acknowledge the Indians can produce something good. But having said that, let's give Bollywood credit. I think when I was Consul General in Karachi, there was a film called Garam Hawa. I don't know how many of you would remember that. Very sensitively produced about the travails of a Muslim family in India during partition. And I think people who came there and saw it in the consulate really wept, because it brought out the pathos of what their forefathers had to go through, what divided families have to go through. But this is confined. Let's face it, when partition took place, Punjab, the transfer of population was total. And it was very bloody. So you do have these tracts in Karachi, in Sindh. It's therefore very difficult to define, a specific Pakistani attitude towards India. The Baloch, for example, is very fond of you. And it is not for reasons the Pakistanis say. It's just they don't share a common border with us. They're very comfortable with us. The same is true of the Pashtun. Despite radicalization in the frontier province, the Pashtun is very comfortable. It is the Punjabi Pakistani who dominates the military where you have problems. Because the military sort of justifies its existence and its perks on the basis of India as the enemy. And you will not have military rule and the military play that sort of a role. And Punjab turns out the military. Some 12 districts turn out 70% of the military of that country. And therefore, the anti-Indianism is very focused, particularly to the military areas. If you go to rural Sindh, you go elsewhere, you won't experience that sort of antipathy which you feel at the heart of Punjab. And coming to Bollywood, I'm told now there's a bit of a craze for Turkish films in Pakistan. I often used to believe that we didn't even need an Indian diplomatic presence to make us look like good guys in Pakistan. Bollywood did a darn good job about it. They were pretty good in putting out where we stand, removing prejudices, because the message of Bollywood, all said and done, is syncretic. There is a secular ethos to it, and I think that's what's best about India. So sometimes it may not be the reality, but nevertheless, it comes across well. So I think film and literature, and something which Declan said amused me. He was talking about Pakistan's Minister of Railways, which is Lieutenant General Javed Ashraf Qazi. Now, Lieutenant General Javed Ashraf Qazi was head of the ISI at one point in time when Kashmir and Punjab were boiling. But very interestingly, he did us a bit of a service, and I hope Shuja Pasha does us the same service somewhat later. The jihadi group which attacked our parliament was a pro-Taliban group called the Jaish-e-Mohammed. And it was the Jaish-e-Mohammed whose leader we released in Kandahar, rather stupidly in my view, which staged the attack on our parliament. But the Jaish-e-Mohammed also did something after 9/11, and queries were risen. Because this group of jihadis also became very anti-American because they were pro-Taliban. And the Jaish-e-Mohammed, thereafter attacking our parliament, did us the favor of trying to bump off General Musharraf. And the net result was, Declan, General Javed Ashraf Qazi stood before Pakistan's parliament and said, these Jaish-e-Mohammed is a horrible group. They not only attacked the Indian parliament, but wonder of wonders, they dared to attempt to kill General Musharraf. So I hope that a similar narrative comes across with respect to those who did the 26/11 horror.
Right. I'm just going to ask Declan and Atish to talk a little bit now about either a story or an experience or an angle or aspect to your writing about Pakistan that made you sweat blood, as the title says. After that, I'm going to ask Mr. Parthasarthi a trick question, and then we'll throw it open to the audience for your questions. So, Declan, tell us when you sweat blood over a story in Pakistan. And don't say you never did. Not acceptable.
By sweat blood, you mean that I sort of exerted myself terribly, or that I actually...
I think some exertion would be involved, right?
Right. Gosh, I mean, well, you know, it's a difficult country to cover as a journalist, as a foreign journalist. You know, I was based there for 9 years. I suppose, the most difficult experience I had was actually at the very end. I was based in Pakistan for 9 years. Technically, I still am. But I had to leave rather precipitously, which you alluded to, back in May when my visa was cancelled with 72 hours notice. And I had to leave. And I suppose that was, you know, I think there's a, you know, I'd always assume, I'd been very conscious in my coverage of Pakistan to, you know, give a breadth of coverage that didn't just talk about the issues of conflict and violence and turmoil, which of course were the main news elements and things that my editors were interested in, but also to talk about other aspects of the country. And I often felt, I suppose, that, you know, that not necessarily that would provide me with some sort of insurance, but you know, that it was my responsibility to give a rounded picture of the country, and the one that didn't just speak to these things, and that people somehow recognized that. But at the end, when I was being sort of marched out of the country, put under house arrest or under hotel arrest in Lahore, and I had to leave, it sort of became clear to me that for some people, for hardliners within the system, there is no, you know, when you take one wrong step and you do one wrong thing, and I'm not entirely sure even to this day what that was, it's very hard to come back from it. And I think, I mean, a lot of this conversation has been about the India-Pakistan facing perspective. I actually take a slightly different view in that for a lot of the time that I've worked in Pakistan, has of course been the post 9/11 period, and actually Pakistani sort of strategic energies and the national narrative has actually been directed towards America, not towards India. And we've sort of left that out of this conversation, I think, but that's actually been the dominant feature. But, you know, anyway, so when I was sort of leaving the country, I think I sort of realized that, you know, these things are fragile perspectives.
Atish?
I would say the story that becomes the foundation for the last story in Noon. I'd been, for a long time when I was in Pakistan, I'd sensed that this kind of underlying violence, and you felt it especially in a place like Karachi where there was a kind of placidity on the surface, had, I don't know how to describe it except to say that it had a certain modern element, that it was not the violence of feudalism, it was something very new, with the same way that the way that we saw that rape case in India a year ago, there was something that was not familiar in any way. And I'd come across this story of someone with a few degrees of separation who had been making videotapes of his girlfriend and him having sex, and those videotapes had been on his laptop. And he'd given the laptop to someone, he was a boy of privilege, he'd given the laptop to somebody in the larger organization to fix. And he'd started to receive these threats of blackmail from a man who had in some ways got hold of these videos. And this story went on for a few months, a kind of building tension between the blackmailer and this guy of privilege. And it finished in a crime of a kind that when this man found out who it was who was blackmailing him, he committed a kind of sexual crime against the guy, including incredible violence. And the way the whole thing blew up, this guy had connections with the MQM, and suddenly the person of privilege was in as much danger for the violence that he'd committed as the man who had been the recipient of the violence. And to me it was like there was something about this kind of, it was something so Pakistani about this story, this feeling of a kind of loose formation of power where people were exerting a kind of control, someone trying to get on top, someone money obviously, like extortion being a major thing running under the surface. And both people, in the end, were vulnerable. both people were desperate, both people could possibly find themselves face to face with some kind of fatal violence. That was the story.
Talking about violence, talking about writing and the difficulties of literature, as I said, I'm going to ask Mr. Parthasarathy a trick question. Earlier this morning we were talking about Salman Rushdie, and since no literary festival is complete or attains the right degree of notoriety unless you mention the Satanic Verses, we must talk about the Satanic Verses, a book which had relevance both for India and for Pakistan and for the wider world outside. So Mr. Parthasarathy was actually recounting to me how exactly the Satanic Verses got banned in India and thereby set off a chain of events which did go on to form history across the world in a way. Perhaps you could just tell our audience a little bit about that.
Before that, I think this is an occasion also to pay tribute to those writers in Pakistan who stick their necks out, challenging an establishment and risking their lives. I think we shouldn't forget them. In my first experience, I found this largely confined to the leftist Urdu poets. And though my mother tongue was Tamil and I speak reasonable Hindi, I had to pick up my Urdu in Pakistan. But I enjoyed nothing more than seeing the likes of Faiz and Habib Jalib in Pakistan, getting together with Shabana's father, Kaifi Azmi, and another great poet from Mumbai, Ali Sardar Jafri, for a poetry session or a mushaira, where, believe me, these guys had the guts to poke fun at General Ziaul Haq. Habib Jalib landed up in jail for his efforts, but they did show courage. And even today, challenging the military, challenging the jihadi groups, you do have writers like Khalid Ahmed, Amir Mir, Imtiaz Gul, Ahmed Rashid, and a very courageous lady, Aisha Aga Siddiqa. So I think we would be doing ourselves a disservice if first we didn't pay our tribute to these people of great courage. It is not an easy thing to take on the military establishment in Pakistan. As I said, you normally end up shot with your body found in some riverside if you do it. So that's first. Coming to Salman Rushdie, I had occasion to talk to, also to you, because my connections with Salman Rushdie were first published by Atish's mother in her book, because we both had occasion to deal with Salman. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about why the book was banned. I've never spoken about it, but I think it's 25 years have gone by and I can talk about it now, because I was involved in that process. I was then working with the Prime Minister, Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, when Salman came for his book earlier on. He visited India, but the book focused largely on Punjab and things like that. But when the book was published, we were going through communal tensions in UP and elsewhere. The communal situation in UP was bad. You had the Malyana and Meerut riots. And a large number of MPs wrote to the PM saying that they had heard about this book, and really they felt it should not be permitted into India. It will only raise communal tensions. And therefore, in terms of the law, a book can be banned only if it is likely to, quote unquote, disturb public order. And that judgment has to be taken by the Union Home Secretary, who was then